My name is Guo Pei. I'm a cultural anthropologist and Oceania specialist. Our research in this project concerns the implications of diplomatic relations with either Taiwan or China in correlation with the economic development of island countries in Oceania. Among the limited number of states that officially recognize Taiwan, today 4 of them are Pacific Island countries: Marshall Islands, Nauru, Palau, and Tuvalu, following the switch of the Solomon Islands and Kiribati to China in 2019. During the tussles over diplomatic recognition, arguments are frequently made that establishing diplomatic ties with China, a much larger economic entity than Taiwan, would enhance the economic development of an island nation. However, there has been no systematic research on the real-world impact of such changes. Looking into the region's economic and trade data in the past 2 decades, our research compares their economic performances, especially in the context of diplomatic relations with Taiwan or China in the past 2 decades. In the 21st century, China has significantly increased its political and economic influences through loans, aids, and economic engagement in the Pacific. China held the first China-Pacific Island countries Economic Development and Cooperation Forum in 2006 and had a second and third ones in 2013 and 2019. Many leaders of Oceanian countries have welcomed China's deeper participation in the region. However, China's many infrastructure projects and concessional loans have been accused of causing huge debt burdens and financial risk. Facing the challenge, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand have announced new foreign policy initiatives explicitly or implicitly designed to counter China's growth in the region. Countries in Oceania are not homogeneous. They vary in size, natural resources, and regions. We look into 12 countries from the 3 sub-regions to cover the variations. The economic involvement of Taiwan and China in the region follows very different paths. China's economic engagement with the region has grown many-fold in the past 2 decades, overtaking Australia to be the largest trading partner of most island countries. In comparison, Taiwan's overall trade with Oceania, though smaller than that of China, South Korea, Australia, and Japan, amounted to $1.2 billion in 2017, at a similar level with the United States. However, Taiwan's trade concentrates mainly on fisheries and the liquid natural gas from the Papua New Guinea, and Taiwan's investment with the region concentrated in fisheries and some tourism business in Palau. Comparatively, China has mass volume in exports and imports, pursues the Belt and Road Initiative, and involves state-owned companies in the mining industry and infrastructure. Difference in differences, or DID, is an analytical tool of economics to study the change of performances by comparing 2 countries over a period of time. We pair countries for comparison based on their similarities in 3 criteria: levels of GDP per capita, size of population, and key economic sectors. The method works better for countries that are economically stable through a longer period of time, such as Tuvalu, Marshall Islands, Federated States of Micronesia, Tonga, Samoa, and Kiribati. Countries that suffer from traumatic events and GDP ruptures present too much noise in the data and are excluded in our DID analysis. Our findings show that siding with Taiwan is an economically reasonable choice for small island states that rely heavily on fisheries. For example, we compare Tuvalu and the Federated States of Micronesia, 2 long-term diplomatic partners of Taiwan and China, respectively. Both of them are Micronesian countries that rely heavily on fisheries and fishing license fees. Using 2006, the generally agreed year when China significantly increased its economic presence and aid engagement in the Pacific, as the break year, DID analysis shows that Tuvalu performed better than FSM, although Tuvalu's growth slowed down after 2007. Given that there are many factors that can influence a change in economic performance, we cannot conclude that maintaining diplomatic relations with Taiwan or China makes a decisive impact. However, the 4 pairs of comparison in our studies have clearly shown that in the case of small island economies, siding with Taiwan is an economically reasonable choice. It might help the economy to some extent, or at least it does not put it in a disadvantaged position with neighbors that remain with China. On the other hand, China's aid and loans might boost the economy for a period of time, such as in the case of Samoa and maybe in Tonga. However, the gains might not last for long, or it might not help as much as expected. However, Tonga and Samoa are now heavily in debt to China, which is not the case for Taiwan's partners. Taiwan has been an important player in the Oceanian fisheries sector since the 1970s, while China is a new and growing player. Taiwan's strong presence in fishery and its cooperation projects with its Pacific allies in enhancing fishery capacities and sustainable management of marine resources also boosted Taiwan's diplomatic outreach. However, it is a different story in the field of natural resource extraction of logging and mining. Forestry resources, including timber exports and agroforestry, contribute significantly to GDPs in the Melanesian countries, and China is the monopoly export market. Chinese engagement with the mining industry in Melanesia has been growing. The capital involved is more diversified and transnational in Papua New Guinea, for there is a long history of resource extraction. China is a latecomer. Chinese companies are now operating the Porgera gold mine and the MCC Ramu nickel mines. In the Solomon Islands and Fiji, we have seen a deeper involvement by companies, private or state-owned, from China, and by ethnic Chinese loggers. Together, they now dominate the newly developed mineral industries in these countries. The timing of their investments coincided with the island's closer relations with China. In Oceania, larger countries whose revenue relies heavily on resource extraction depend on China as their export destination and thus make them economically vulnerable to China's political pressure. Palau is a good example in dealing with economic sanctions from China. The economy of Palau is dominated by tourism, fishing, and subsistence agriculture. Before 2010, Palau's tourism industry was driven largely by scuba divers from Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. Visitors from Taiwan and Japan constituted some 70% of the total tourists in the first decade of the century. In 2010, Palau opened up tourism to China. The number of Chinese tourists spiked dramatically and made up to more than 54% in 2016. In November 2017, the Chinese government took steps to block Palau as a tourist destination, and the number of Chinese tourists quickly dropped. Media reports stated that Palau had been targeted politically because it maintained diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and China was hoping to turn up the pressure. Palau adopted to the Chinese embargo by focusing on higher spending visitors rather than mass tourism, which has taken a toll on the environment. Their idea is that the Chinese ban would not hurt the economy, but rather offer Palau a chance to diversify its tourism industry and pursue its own vision of development. Based on our analysis and in reference to our interviews, there are several policy implications for the government of Taiwan and its partners. A diversified import-export market could increase the economic resilience of Oceanian countries against China's pressure and help them exercise sovereignty in foreign policy. Taiwan needs to work with international communities to encourage potential investors to work with local governments who prefer investment in onshore value-added facilities in industry of fishing, agriculture, mining, tourism, etc. for sustainable economic growth as a better path than China-dominant propulsion, whether in forms of trade or aids. Taiwan and its partners should take a diplomatic approach with an Oceania-centered perspective, especially its vision of development and sustainability and the priority agenda on climate change.